righty. It's 9:15. I think I'm going to get started and people will straggle in. So that's all right with me. Jonathan is on the line with us. Hello, Jonathan. What city are you in, Jonathan? Hi, Anna. He'll unmute himself in a minute. So this was an interesting chapter for me because my first priesthood office was priest. And so when Mr. Dempsey was talking about priestliness, I was not tracking with him at all, because priestliness in the Old Testament, and quite frankly, even priestliness when we're going to talk about Jesus kind of pushing back against, his disciples and the Pharisees in the church and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of a different term than what I think of priests now, or even Aaronic priesthood now. So that's why I kind of wanted to start with that premise.
Yeah, so he was doing more historical priest.
Yeah, this is historical priestliness.
Testament priestliness.
So what do you guys, let me ask before we go into Dempsey, what do you guys think of with that as my introduction? What do you guys think of the priestliness of the Old Testament, of the priests, that Jesus was kind of battling against, in terms of the laws, which they were testing him all the time. What do you guys think of the priestliness in the Bible and the examples that they made for us?
I think the laws were more important than the people, and being exact in how you did the rituals.
Anybody else have a thought on the priestliness of the Bible?
Well, in ancient times,
Yeah, speak loud.
in ancient times, people were trying to appease whatever God they believed in. So I think that carried over to the Israelites view of things, that they kind of do things right to.
They were like afraid to displease the gods.
Right.
And so whenever they were speaking to their one true God, they were like, oh, we have to get it right.
Yeah, I have to wonder if that wasn't just from the history of how you interacted with a God.
Yeah, I mean,
whatever kind of God the Canaanites or whoever were believing.
Well, yeah, and we'll see that, Dempsey called them the Deuteronomy authors, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but they really were, you either follow the laws or you die, kind of a thing, I mean, they believed in a God that was that strict.
Well, they also, then they would be shunned from going to the synagogue, and that would be the ultimate.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The temple too. Yeah.
And my Bible started doing John, where he made the blind man see, and like who did that to you, and that kind of thing. And even his parents, like, talked to him. He's an adult. They didn't even support their own son, because then they would have been shunned from the synagogue and all that kind of stuff. And that would have just been
right. Yeah, there is this fear factor, I mean, the fear of God has always been a mystery to me, because people say now it's like, oh, the fear of God means lots and lots of love, and we kind of twist it all around to say it's a good thing, and it's like, I'm pretty sure in the Old Testament things it was like just pure prayer,
And some of the laws required them to be killed.
Oh yeah. Oh, we're going to get to some of those. I know. It's like, oh my gosh, don't go into a foreign land and bring back a foreign wife, because they're all gonna get killed. Everybody. It's bad. Okay, so that's kind of our thought processes. Here's what Dempsey says about priestliness. He says there's kind of a blessing and a curse to priestliness. There's this militant side, and then there's a ministerial side. And the interesting thing about that is that both sides are needed. Is that too small? Of course it is. Sorry, guys. So both are preoccupied with the law and the tradition. So the priests, on the one hand, they're protecting the faith, and they're serving the institution of the church. So they everything about being priestly in Old Testament times. I mean, honestly, you think about the tasks of priesthood members now. You know, there is this balance that you have to do. There's the protecting the faith, serving the institution, serving the traditions. And so you have Moses on the one hand offering the prophetic ministry, but then you have Aaron, who is that priestly ministry. And so these roles are always in tension, you know, that they don't always fight with each other, but they're going for different things. You know, the prophetic ministry is dynamic. It's saying, let's change. Here's what God wants us to do to change the status quo. And the priestly ministry is saying, hold off. Let's follow our traditions. Let's make sure that we're doing it in an orderly manner, you know, and both are needed, but then they also kind of fight with each other sometimes. I think that's what Dempsey is talking about. You know, this is that militant versus ministerial priestliness. There's a lot of reforms that Dempsey talks about in coming from 700 BC up to 621 BC. And so I've just put a couple of them in here. And each time there was a reform in the Jewish faith, how I understand this chapter is Dempsey is telling us that the priests were centralizing religion more and more. And they were enforcing the traditions of the temple priests, you know. And hey, somebody explained to me, Dennis, do you understand this? They found the central book of the Deuteronomy. They actually, who found it? Did you understand that? When if we go to 2 Kings, King Josiah found the book of Deuteronomy, but where did he find it? And that's where I'm a little confused. Did he find it in a temple somewhere? Did you understand?
Kind of thought that, but sure.
Yeah, I know.
I think he was cleaning it.
He's cleaning out the temple one day.
Well, he kind of did clean out the temple because it had been defiled by the Assyrians.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, maybe that's what it was, because the Assyrians were the ones that had just kind of conquered them, so they were getting, you know, rid of everything. Maybe they were, you know, there's a lot of books. There was a mention in this chapter which I thought was really kind of fascinating, and we see the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, that we found. What year did we find the Dead Sea Scrolls? It was 1950s.
Or was
So-
it in the 40s?
Late 40s.
Late 40s. So Dempsey says that it was because of these priests who were so meticulous at writing down the laws and, you know, quite frankly, hiding them from any conquerors, that we were able to find these books years and years and centuries later, you know. So that's another good thing that the priests did for us. But in this particular time period, you know, I think what Coral says is right. I mean, it was really more about the law than the people, you know, and there was such fear that there were too many outside influences, you know, like in the Josiah time, there were all of those pagan influences, you know, and so it was all about centralizing worship. And it was all about, this is the box that we need to stay in. And they had such zeal for this order that they were destroying temples and what these, remember the word Bethel, which is a high place, that these local priests, a couple of chapters ago, we were talking about how, you know, the Jewish religion really started as local tribes. And so they were just learning how to be a one cohesive religion. And so what I understand, what Josiah was doing is that he was finding these Bethels, you know, that were created by these local priests, and they weren't in line with the centralized religion. So he destroyed some things that really, they weren't doing bad things. They were just not quite there to where, you know, where his idea of the Jewish faith was. So some people, you know, called him the I think it's on the next page. Some people were calling him the you know, the most righteous king. But then others say, well, he goes and destroys things just
Kills
because
priests.
he killed the priest just because it wasn't in line with his new reform. So this is this reverence to Deuteronomy so this book, what happens, how I understand it, is Josiah finds this book, and then these become the Deuteronomic priests, that it's all about law and order for them. They're the ones that are saying, oh, in fact, Dempsey even thinks that they put some words into Moses's mouth that really wasn't a tradition during Moses's time. It was a tradition 700 years later during their time. So there's that question. But it was all about, we have to preserve the scripture. We have to preserve the traditions. The religious rules were systemized, and then it was all about obedience to these statutes. So the prophets then, he talks about this prophet, the prophet Jeremiah was praising Josiah at first because, he is creating this, new reform of what it should be to worship. But then later, Jeremiah recognizes that there's some shallow legalisms and harsh execution of these statutes. So we're always looking at this balance as we're looking at these early Jewish, the journey that they were on. Okay, so you got the prophets that we've talked about who are kind of pushing the envelope. They're saying, okay, wait a minute, this is what God wants us to do. And then you've got the priests pulling back to say, we can't lose our traditions. And honestly, don't you think that's kind of how it is still? You look at our own, you look at our own religion, and it has always been that push and pull, where you have the prophet saying, this is where I want the church to go. This is where God wants the church to go. And then you have the traditionalists, all different priesthood members, laypersons, all these different things that are saying, we also need to keep our traditions. And so to me, it's that balance of both sides not necessarily getting in each other's way. It's more about listening and trying to figure out what to let go of and what to keep, and obviously that's the debate forever, so I'm not sure there is an answer for
I think
everything.
that dynamic is at play everywhere in time.
I do too. That's going to happen, It's just inevitable, when women in 1984, how many people said, no, I can't do it. This is what the Bible says about women. I was quoted in the scripture of how, women shouldn't be in the priesthood. I didn't really catch it at the time, but I'm thinking, that was an immediate reaction I got from someone. And so every time our prophet moves us one direction, we're going to have a large group of people that are going to say, wait a minute, let's slow down, and then I think our job as leaders of our church, of being a part of this church, is to figure out that balance together. That's how I look at it. We find the balance and then we move forward together. So I really do like how these priests collected and preserved our documents for us. That you think about that alone, you definitely need those people to say, this is what's important. We're going to keep it for generations to come, So here are some of the, Dempsey calls it the stamps that the priests made on some of these traditions. He called them deadly boring readings.
Well, they kind of are.
They kind of are. Well, you think about Matthew, and he was just so hell-bent on making sure we knew that Jesus was of the lineage I have another one of the lineage, but it's like Joseph wasn't even Jesus's father, I mean, so it was the lineage of his stepfather, so.
Well, they also went through his mother too, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, but the lineage in Matthew is the father.
Father.
So what Dempsey says, and it'll be on the next screen, is that he did that to convince the Jewish people
Yeah.
that Jesus was the right guy. So I just thought it was kind of interesting that some of these, there was weird stuff that is in Exodus about, I don't know, I get rid of, whoops,
Well, reading Deuteronomy is.
I messed it all up. I messed it up.
Reading Deuteronomy, I always thought was really boring, and which is the one that has nothing but lineage in it.
Mhm.
That numbers.
Well, Exodus, there's a census in Exodus, and then Numbers has it. There's this thing, ritual instruments, that was interesting. Apparently Exodus has a lot of these things about the instruments that you need to use in all of your worships. So they were really like obsessed with using the right instrument, And so I just have these examples of, you guys got to go look it up. I'm not going to go look it up for you, but it's the ram of ordination. It's this whole story of how they're using a ram as a ritual.
Mhm.
And then one of these guys boiled the meat wrong. So, you boiled the meat wrong.
Roasted it instead of.
Yeah,
boiling it.
he roasted it instead of boiled it. These are the things that people were concerned about in some of these chapters. This is why, I don't know about you guys, but I don't study it very much because it's just, I agree with Dempsey. It's kind of deadly boring. It's like, who cares, And honestly, that's kind of what Jesus was saying with some of the stuff, it's like, who cares,
Tradition.
I know. I'm going to do my, Jesus totally messed up their minds because he did work on the Sabbath, and it's like, so it's interesting that the prophets, this is where we have that tension again. The prophets scorned rituals and the priests obsessed over them. So you think about that issue, you've got even you think about it, even in our own church, all of us have rituals in our own church that we love. All right. And then there's also some ritualistic things that go on that some of us do not love, I am one of these people, and this is why we're going to have a different kind of service next Sunday. Because I don't like to look at the order of worship and say, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen, And other people love it. So I'm not going to say my way is the correct way. I'm going to say some rituals aren't for me. Others are, I love the ritual of communion. I love the ritual, that the rituals that we do at Christmas time, I would sing Christmas hymns all year long if I could. It's very ritualistic for me.
When Leah and I were first married and we were going to church out at Wichita, Dave Strobar was there at that time. And one communion Sunday, instead of having the service in the sanctuary, he set us up in the fellowship hall with tables set up in the shape of a cross. And instead of passing the bread on plate, they passed a loaf and you tore off a little chunk, And I tell you, some of those older ladies in the congregation.
I'm thinking, I bet he got mixed reactions.
Oh, man, they just went.
Yeah. That's
That
exactly
was
what I'm talking
Pray
about.
do communion.
But then others probably,
Loved it.
loved it. Exactly. That's the tension right there. That's the tension that, I agree with Ryan. I think we're always going to have some kind of tension like that in our churches, especially in our particular church that continues to have prophecy versus priestliness. Kind of, I hate to use the word battle, but sometimes it's a battle, So here's that Leviticus quote that just kind of scared me to death. Obey. Okay, so some of these priests were saying, obey them. I'm going to try again to do
You dragged it over.
Hang on, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm gonna, sorry, guys, I'm gonna get rid of your. There.
Mhm.
Okay, so obey these statutes regardless of their merit. So this is Leviticus. If you spurn my statutes and if your soul abhors my ordinances, I will point over you sudden terror, consumption, and fever that waste the eyes and cause life to pine away. Oh my gosh. And we wonder why they were in fear. That's a biggie. So Dempsey thinks this isn't Moses. Do you guys agree with him or disagree with him? Do you think it's these, he thinks it's these Deuteronomic priests 7 to 8 centuries later who are writing in the Book of Kings there was a quote in this chapter where they think that he thinks, and a lot of the scholars, you got to remember who Dempsey was. Dempsey really was a scholar that, he talks about the different writers of the Bible, and he doesn't explain himself sometimes of where he gets his knowledge, which is a little frustrating for me. But what he's saying here is that these particular writers went back to the book of Leviticus and the book of Exodus, and they put their influences in there. So their influence was this rigid obedience to statute. So there's a question in Dempsey's mind of whether Moses was that rigid, but definitely whoever wrote it was that rigid. So that's the debate. We don't have to go into the huge debate about that today, but that's the debate of a lot of Old Testament scholars.
Well, I guess my question would be, why would God have us do something that had no merit?
Well, you think about lots and lots of priests that you think about the early Christian church and the things that they did that wouldn't have been, God didn't want them to do it. Just their fear made them do it. I mean, you think about the early Catholic popes and what they did to make sure, to make sure that people followed their laws,
Well, early America, if you didn't go to church, you were punished.
I know that.
Well, depending on where it was called.
And I think it's Massachusetts where they got a little crazy.
They punish people for just not going to church.
Mhm.
I didn't know that. All right, see, there you go. So yeah, it happens a lot. It's happened a lot over the centuries, once again.
And if you laughed on Sunday, they put you in the stocks or something like that.
Whoa.
You don't be doing that.
Yes, we would.
Were those the same people that burned the witches?
Yeah, basically.
I wondered about that. Kind of goes along with the whole issue of the witches that they had.
Days in this church where if you didn't show up to church, somebody track you down and find out why you weren't there.
Yeah, that is actually true.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, they used to have, I don't know, the deacons or somebody, that was one of their jobs, and back in the 50s and 60s was to check on
people.
check them off, had like a list, and if you weren't there, they'd check to make sure,
You had a valid
town, I
reason.
guess, were permissible.
Yeah, and it wasn't to say, how are you? It was to
Yeah.
say, why didn't you come to church?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these covenant, he talks a lot about that, the covenant concept. And so in the word covenant was central to the priests. They did not create the concept of covenant, but they kind of latched onto it and embellished it and kind of created laws around this covenant. And the way Dempsey talks about it, they took it to the level of, making their people the chosen people. So the covenant is so central to the Jewish faith that once again, you cannot deviate from it, and this is where we get the lineage issues coming up. Because when you think about, is Nadine, where'd she go? Nadine talked about the Noah story and how the Noah story, that rainbow really was more along the lines of God's covenant to the world, that he wasn't going to destroy the world again. So it was God's covenant with the earth. And so this is once again, these priests emphasizing covenant between God and the people. And twice he talked to Abraham, first in the name of Abram, to say, I will make your descendants as dust. So that many particles. And then when he was 99 years old, he told him he was going to be the father of all nations. And so what did this do for the Jewish people? It became their identity. It became, okay, God has this covenant exclusively with us. And so that's where we started getting into, and we still hear that they are the chosen people. And you guys remember, I grew up saying that about our church.
Yep.
We are the chosen people. God gave us more scriptures than anybody else. So I have more of a responsibility than others do. I mean, I don't know how many times I said that as a child. I didn't understand it, but I said it,
But were the Jews the only people that had the concept of the chosen people, or did lots of people think they were the chosen people?
I think rampant nationalism was in more than just, I think that you think about what tribalism was back in the day, and then tribalism was very, very smaller communities. But then when they created these larger communities centralized in their religion, that became like a national identity. And so that's what Dempsey talks about with rampant nationalism. I think you're right. I think, well, you think of nationalism even now. I mean, I think about nationalism during World War II. I probably study that war more than anything else, but nationalism was such a part of World War II that was why America.
And one.
That's true.
And one.
I don't know as much about World War I, but both,
Yeah.
you're right. But I remember, we didn't get into either one of those wars. And I remember reading FDR saying it doesn't have anything to do with us, so as long as America is safe, then we're not going to get into this world. And so nationalism, I think it's a part of every generation.
Well, and look what's happening in India now.
Oh, I know. And we're going to get into the Jewish Palestine thing just a little
Oh,
tiny
yeah.
bit too,
But
that's
yeah,
huge.
They're trying to make Hinduism the official state religion and push everybody else out.
Yeah, so I think Dennis is right. I think it was there. It was nationalism was within a lot of different groups. But what we're talking about in this chapter is the priests of this time that just fed in to their outlook. I mean, we are the chosen people. We have the right rules. We have all these rules. And if we follow these rules, then God is going to favor us, And so there's a couple of stories, and I didn't understand them very well, but one of them is a debate between Reuben and Judah for the favor of Jacob/Israel. And how the sons react to the father's need. And I think what the point is, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, because I didn't understand it very much. I will admit. So what my thought was in these chapters in Genesis was that each of the sons had a different way to show his father that he was going to take care of him. And so it really is about this competition, so to speak, about I am the chosen person. No, I am the chosen person. So, and then we get into the story that we've talked about before, that Moses in the book of Numbers, Moses commanded his officers and the foreign women that they married to be killed because it tainted their people. It was a foreign contamination.
We've still got that going today, even in our country.
Well, there's a lot of nationalism, I mean, obviously we're not killing people for marrying foreigners, but
Well, some people are. Yeah, they're trying to.
well, there's definitely the issue of they're tainting us. Don't let them in, kind of a thing. So,
Well, I've always wondered, it's another big inconsistency in the Bible. Moses comes down from the mount with the 10 commandments. I believe one of them says, "Thou shalt not kill."
Yeah.
But in, the Exodus and everything, we go into Jericho and we kill everybody,
mhm,
even the animals, I think.
Yeah,
And there are all instances through the Old Testament where you go in and you kill the Canaanites, or you kill foreign wives or
Mhm.
whoever. And I'm like, there's a real disconnect there for me.
it
Well, you
was,
had the Crusades, they went in and
Yeah,
killed
the
everybody.
Crusades and medieval Europe or whatever.
yeah,
What was
doing it for God.
Doing it for God.
Yeah.
I think it was the one that said, "Thou shalt not."
I was watching one the other day on TV about it, and he says, I'm gonna kill I'm gonna make every one of them a Christian, even if I have to kill them to do it.
Well, that was sort of the Crusades too, and the Inquisition.
yeah,
Okay.
Well, sometimes entire countries were converted that way. That's why the Scandinavian countries, the king said, become Christian or die. Well, that's a pretty easy choice to make.
Like, what does that say about your religious belief?
yeah.
Murder and coercion are tools to use for fostering faith.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of them make it more legalistic by saying thou shalt not. Well, they still consider that would still be murder. I don't know.
Yeah,
It
there's
is-
a lot of things that people can do in the name of God that they couldn't do on their own, I mean, if you put that little caveat in there, it's like, well, this is what God wants us to do. Even, you think of the word holy wars, you think, I mean, we've got lots and lots of hymns that talk about the justification of war. And you know what? That's too big of a debate to talk about today.
A lot of those things aren't in
That's true. That's true.
the
I think that,
militaristic images.
I
of
think they did take a lot out of
those
it.
hymns have been
Yeah.
removed, which I think is probably a good idea.
But I will admit to you, after 9/11, I found a children's song that talked about
The Army of the Lord.
the army of the Lord. I did, I
Yeah.
was being,
We don't
yeah,
have that
I was
anymore.
being very militaristic. I didn't
We don't
have the
sing
awareness at the
him.
time, but that's what I did. Because that's how I felt,
We don't sing God is marshaling his army anymore, and I think
No.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, we should look that up to see how many of
That's
them are
what
still
all
there.
that happens when you worship religion and you don't worship the one who
Yes,
gave religion to humanity.
Well, and let's recognize that we're human, I mean, we become militaristic sometimes because we're angry, and we need the military because there are times when other people are so unreasonable that we need to protect ourselves. And so it's too simple to say, we shouldn't be militaristic at all. I mean, we all know that. It has to be about, I keep saying the word balance, but the chosen people part of it, I think, has messed us up. That whole nationalism part, I think, the Old Testament and who we were as a very young church, and even what happens, as Americans sometimes, we're chosen to be, the chosen people. And I think a lot of countries in the world look at us as kind of that arrogant American because of how we act sometimes. I mean, that's just reality.
We have earned that.
We have kind of, we kind of have,
and look at what happened to us, the Mormon Wars, because we got too proud and
oh, yeah.
chosen.
So Jane, I think there's a difference you can make between the concept of exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm.
Like I believe in some aspects, America, for instance, is exceptional,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean we're superior. It just means we are unique. In other ways, we're not exceptional, but you can be an exceptional people, you can be a chosen people, but not necessarily superior and meant to lord it over other.
That is a very, very thin line,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying.
It is.
I think when we
This
say,
is based on covenant, and covenant is a two-part contract.
Yeah,
We can embrace the chosenness that says, you know, God loves us better than everybody else. But we also have to embrace the chosenness that says we're gonna work harder than anybody else to do God's will.
Right.
That's the second part of the covenant that Israel kept forgetting and that we forget today, is that we're here to serve, not to dominate.
Yeah.
yeah, I like that.
I think that the problem in Israel and Gaza right now goes back to this chosen people idea.
I think so too. I mean, Dempsey actually touches on it in his chapter. So I'm obviously we're not going to talk politics, but it is interesting to me that this concept keeps coming back to us. You know, I mean, here it is in the Old Testament, and I wrote Remember Ruth on this slide because, you know, I don't remember which chapter it was, but we were talking about how Ruth came in and her story is,
well, that's the book of Ruth.
I know,
Oh, okay,
That's
you
what I mean.
said you didn't know where it, oh, you don't
in
know
our
where the book.
where we learned it in our which
Oh.
chapter in this book.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
sorry.
Yeah, I know. So what Ruth did was she pushed back against that militarism, that, you know, idea that and people didn't know what to do with her story, you know, because all of a sudden it was a really good thing to accept a foreign person that came into their world. So I really liked how our Bible actually has both examples of what to do.
And I made a note when I was reading covenant theology, where it was talking about dispossessing the people who inhabited Palestine. I was saying, is it happening again?
Oh, I know. I actually wrote that too. I noticed that too, because Dempsey wrote this book in 1993,
Yeah,
you know. So it's interesting that he wrote that sentence. So read that sentence again, because that kind of struck me too.
dispossessing the peoples who inhabited Palestine was justified because God had covenanted it to Israel.
Yeah.
In priestly literature, there was no doubt that slaughter and dispossession of inhabitants was fully justified for the glory of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of see that.
Do you think Truman thought that whenever? Because it was Truman that kind of made that decision after World War II, wasn't he? That said, okay, we're gonna carve out this part of the land as Israel for the Jews. Do you think he was going back to the Bible? Anybody know their history?
Probably more than just Truman. There were
Yeah.
Other heads of states.
They all, do you
Yeah.
think they kind of went back to that concept though? I mean, obviously, I always just thought of it as we need to find them a home because they are so dispossessed now of a home, you know, but maybe it was more than that, because this scripture is pretty clear, you know.
Well, it may have been just this fact that they wanted a home for them, and that's where they said their home was.
That's right.
Yeah,
I don't know if they bought into that they,
Yeah.
by
Where do you want-
God's decree, deserved to be placed in that spot.
Yeah, they asked him, where do you want to go? And
well, and in the Seder, they always say next year in Israel.
oh yeah, it's definitely,
So it's,
yeah. So, because that's the scripture. It says, God remembered his covenant to Abraham and said to the people that I will deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And so that's where Dempsey talks about there's this connection then, you
Yeah.
know, of it. And anybody who's got Jewish friends, they do that. I mean, they're very reverent about visiting Israel. Everybody has to go, you know, I mean,
yeah, my in-laws have been several times.
yeah.
Well, doesn't it depend on which sect of Judaism you're in?
I don't know. I mean, honestly,
Well,
I think they all have that concept.
Orthodox, conservative,
Reformed.
Reformed, yeah, they all believe that. I'm not so much sure about the Reconstructionists or some of the other more
Mhm.
modern sects. But I would say the three main definitely still believe,
Yeah.
if
Well,
not, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, to me, it'd be interesting, I'm not aware that they haven't, but these people they dispossessed in ancient times, did those people have their own scriptures that might have said that that was their land by God's decree? The Canaanites or
Yeah,
the Philistines, whoever, maybe they had their own scriptures. We just don't have their scriptures. We
Yeah.
have only one.
right. We have the scriptures of the people who won that battle,
Well,
you know.
I was always disturbed when Moses was told to go fight the Midianites because that's who his father-in-law and his wife was from.
Mm.
So I was always going.
Dempsey,
okay.
yeah, Dempsey talks about that. And so even back then, it really is, history is written by the people who won.
Yes.
You know, all history is, and even then, I mean, we read in the Old Testament a lot about how the Jewish nation was dispossessed of their land and how they wandered and they're trying to fight their way back. But what we forget sometimes is that they're writing their story for us.
Yeah.
You know, and so when they did go back into Israel, whoever those people were, they were weaker than them. And that's why Dempsey talks about this blessing of the covenant. It doesn't matter. You don't have to earn it. It's just, that's the covenant that God made with the Israelites. And so it means that you are chosen. And that's where we get into this concept of exceptionalism. The danger of it is, I am chosen and the worth of others is absent, you know. And this is why I love that our church talks about the worth of all persons so much, because when we forget the worth of others, then it's going to be us versus them. Well, we're the chosen ones. We're the ones that have more knowledge, you know, or whatever it is that we grew up with in terms of, I have this job to go out and tell everybody about, you know, my religion. And we forget the worth of the person that we're talking to,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's what Dempsey is talking about with when the covenant theology goes too far.
We can see what's happened in the last couple of years, how the ones that won the battle go in and try to change the story. They're trying to take, you know, they did it years and years ago against the Indians and not telling the story of what happened.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to do it with what happened to the blacks, you know, and they're trying to take it out of our history lessons and
Some
not
peop-
supposed to
some
talk
people
about
are.
Yeah.
Some
Right.
people are.
so you can see, you know, we're doing it today. You know, they did it back then. You know, they changed some of the facts that, you know, and we don't have any way of knowing unless, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they get more out of it than they've, you know, got presently, or some other records. We would, you know, all we have is what we have now.
It is, sometimes it's hard to find the truth, because the truth is in that person who wrote the truth, you know, and so that truth is the truth to them, but might not necessarily be the truth for us. So that's gonna be a question for us.
You know, our church has sort of been on both sides of that, when you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going back to the 1830s and 40s.
Mhm.
We came into independence, a bit on the, maybe the arrogant side, that we were kind of like the chosen people.
Mhm.
But then we were booted out, so we were dispossessed people on the other side. Then they kicked us out, and in Nauvoo the same thing happened. So we've been on both sides
Yeah,
in our own church.
even
Getting
our
kicked
church,
out or trying to say we're the chosen ones.
yeah.
Well, they even had an extermination order in Missouri.
Oh, I know.
That was
Bugs,
finally
bugs.
overturned in what, the 80s?
Yeah. Well, and you think about the beginning of our church, of our LDS, you know, I mean, we were definitely kind of just saying to the Mormons who went to Salt Lake City, it's like, okay, wait a minute, that's not who we are, you know. And so that's been our debate in our own church for a century now, that are we now the chosen people? So here's that lineage thing that we're talking about. Between these two scriptures, there were 42 ancestors that they talked about. So
Hmm.
lineage is a big thing to the priestly group of people. What do you guys think about our own? You guys have your own lineage and your patriarchal blessing?
No,
Mine doesn't.
mine doesn't either.
Yeah,
Mine does.
they did forever. And my grandmother, oh my goodness me, I heard all about my lineage. I did not understand a thing she was saying. You know, it's this tribe and this tribe and this, all the way back to what tribe we were.
Hmm.
I need to go back and look at that again.
And
Yeah, that was huge
Well, I
in the
guess
early
maybe I
church.
didn't, I wasn't out of the 12 tribes. Maybe I was out of some of the other things.
I don't
Yeah, no, I
know.
never got a tribe.
Lineage was kind of
Most
big.
people that, if that was in their patriarchal blessing back then, were from the tribe of Ephraim. And the significance there was, that was the Nephi people. Okay, so
Yeah.
the Book of Mormon was
Maybe that's,
so
but I'll go
important to
back
the
and
early
look.
church, and everybody wanted to be somehow attached, you know, whether it was a spiritual attachment or
Okay.
a actual lineage. Which it probably wasn't, you know,
Yeah.
people wanted to have that consistency and feel like they were part of the group that came over to the Americas. with the-
Okay, that makes sense to me now.
So, you know, the most of the 12 tribes were dispersed when the
Yeah.
Assyrians and the Babylonians came down and took over Israel and Judah. And the one group that left that came to America was the tribe, they were from the tribe of Ephraim. So.
So that would have been
It is
important
weird because
to
most of
us.
Did not come.
Well, yeah,
unified.
my
They
family-
came between like 1800 and 1900.
Yeah.
My family went back, they came back.
I had
from
2
England.
family members that came early on, but then the rest of them were post-Civil War.
You know.
Yeah, that makes sense though, why my grandmother was into lineage like that. I'm gonna go look it up. I bet she did say Ephraim. I just was 10, didn't pay attention to my grandmother. So, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
Nana.
I
Yeah.
didn't get a lineage.
I just remember her making that point to me over and over
So
again.
was it in your patriarchal?
Are we
blessing?
talking with everyone?
Alex was asking about Doris. Doris was from another tribe.
Another tribe that sometimes showed up in blessings was the tribe of Benjamin, and that's, I think, what Doris was.
We only had one person here in the congregation that was told from that tribe, and it was Doris.
All right.
But
See, but it was important to
It
her.
was important.
the lineage is kind of, you know, is your identity.
Yeah. But that was important in our early church. That was
Yeah.
definitely important. I don't think it is so much anymore. I think that we've that's another one of those
would-
priestly things that our religion now isn't as concerned with. But, you know, for our grandparents.
No, I
They
got my
were.
patriarchal blessing in 72 and there was no mention of lineage.
Okay.
Mine was in 80. It was
Yeah.
at Graceland.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Mine
That's
was
where I
right
got mine
around the
too.
70s. Early.
I was a
70s.
freshman in college and I was at Graceland my first year.
I think I was a senior in high school.
So Dempsey talks about the concepts of peace and unity and how the prophet is part of the prophet's goal is to kind of push people out of their comfort zone. So the prophet will disturb the peace to bring about a needed reform. But the priest, this is that tension again, is going to stifle the needed reform in order to maintain the peace and prevent disunity.
Mhm.
So both of these are important. And the problem is that when you've got one person saying, here's that truth that's going to ultimately save his people, the immediate effect is going to be disquieting, but the truth will prevail. And then you got the priests whose immediate concern is the morale of his people. So he doesn't want that tension. Dempsey call it healing them lightly, you know. So I thought that was interesting. But what I kind of like though is that the priests have always been, and when you think about even in every church now, that priestly function is to maintain the peace while everybody catches up to what the prophet, if it's a good, solid prophecy, let's just be clear, you know, I mean, obviously there's a lot of false prophecies and we have to kind of wade through that. But the priest's job is to kind of wait and make sure that it's a tried and true concept. And then they're gonna go on board and say yes.
Well, they did point out that there were a lot of prophecies. There were court prophets, there were
Exactly.
prophets. There were
Exactly. So this prophet creates the religious content. You know, you think about our own church and all through the Bible, it's the prophet that creates that tension, that new concept.
Mhm.
And then it's the priest that once it's time honored, then the priest preserves it for everybody. So that I kind of like how it's that transfer. I like how Dempsey said it. The transfer from the prophetic to the priestly is wholesome and necessary for the stability of religion, because stability needs that central core of consistent beliefs around which the people can unite. You know, otherwise we're a little bit too chaotic. That's kind of what the priests are saying. It's like, hold off, let us
Think about
think
stability.
about it.
Maybe if you think about the high wire walker, they have that balance pole.
Yeah.
And if one side is prophetic and there's no priestly, you fall off.
Mhm.
If you have priestly and no prophetic,
Mhm.
but if you have both, maybe you can walk the high wire.
Yeah. And sometimes it is just time. It is just time that helps us figure out. I mean, nobody in our church right now debates women in the priesthood. I mean, they're not here. If they do, let's just be clear, you know? But there's other things that we're still struggling with, you know? And I do think that perhaps that's what the duty is for this priestly function, is to say, okay, let's preserve the status quo until we can work this out, and to make sure that it's a prophecy
Well, and I have
that we
to
can
push
live
back
with.
on it a little bit, because that's partly what makes things move at a glacial pace.
I agree.
Theology or social change.
That's
or
true.
anything else. It's because, oh, not yet, yes, too soon.
Yeah.
I
That's
know.
what a lot of people said in Reconstruction.
I
Oh,
know.
not yet, it's too soon.
I know.
I can't remember, we talked about, there was a theory, it might be an actual practice, but you know, if people believe and get to a point, and I can't remember what the number is, like 10,000 or something, that 10,000 first person, once they get that person, it kind of floods the plane, you know, people will believe, and then all of a sudden it becomes,
Yeah.
you know.
It's like, it's that
com-
tipping, it's that
it-
tipping
it's what
point.
Tips it over.
Mhm.
And
Critical mass.
Huh?
Critical mass.
yeah, maybe. I can't remember what it was. Actually, it was Joan who I think told me about it years ago, and I can't remember what it was, but
Yeah.
it's a theory out there, and you know, I teach leadership and to my kids, and we talk about you can't get too far ahead of your people or they get lost and disturbed. So you have to stay just that bit ahead of them and keep them moving forward so you don't lose them.
Well, and
And
you have to think about it, and you as a teacher understand this too. I mean, you know, we're always talking about, you know, well, of course you teach gifted children, so might be a little easier for you. But in a regular classroom, you've got these, you know, really bright kids over here and not so bright kids over here. And it's like this poor teacher
right.
is trying to teach them all at the same time. And so, I mean, I was fairly bright as a child and I was bored a lot. And I remember the teachers that gave me something different, that
And that's
gave me
what-
something
right.
new.
So teachers constantly are trying to
And I
give
think
enrichment,
that,
take,
yeah,
modify over here, teach in the middle.
I was the not so gifted
okay.
because
Well, and
I
you,
can't learn from lectures. I have to do.
well, you probably remember the teacher that spent some special time with you.
Not really.
Not very many. I'm
Well,
sorry.
and I work in elementary, so there's not, I mean, all teachers know that you don't lecture. I mean, I think in the older
Yeah.
grades,
Yeah.
there's a little more of that, but you know, hands-on and, you know, working.
Yeah, I don't remember.
There's a lot of different.
Well, there
Hands on.
There is
They
that
don't-
danger of leaving someone behind.
Oh,
You
It
know?
always happens.
And it happens. And think about it in the church too. I mean, this is what we have to remember as leaders.
I didn't start doing well in school until after I had been working and then went back to pick up some college
Yeah.
courses. And then it was like, oh my goodness, I'm not so dumb after all.
No, it didn't all click for me until freshman year of
It's a
college.
very common experience.
Yep.
It is, it is.
We have a lot of people who
So,
cannot read.
so what is a glacial
Now-
place? So what is a glacial pace for Sharon is gonna be too much for someone else. And so the leaders of every religion have gotta find that balance. It is I do not envy
and-
our world church leaders for this purpose, you
And
know?
honestly, I'm like Sharon, I want things to move faster too, and sometimes we're ahead of those guys. There are people who are ahead of the leader, and they're just waiting for them to catch up.
Yeah.
I think it depends on. Let's see, last 10 minutes, I've been trying to formulate some thoughts on this, because if we're talking about progress, it sounds like, and
Mhm,
change.
mhm.
I am not progressive. I guess I'm progressive in some ways, but I don't consider myself politically progressive. I'm more of a traditionalist.
Okay.
G.K. Chesterton, Catholic writer, he said, if you see a fence post, in the ground, instead of just removing it, consider what was it there in the first place? Why was that fence post there?
That's the priestly function.
Yeah,
That is the
So-
priestly function.
yeah.
What is the purpose of this tradition?
And, and tradition is like democracy working itself out across the ages.
Mhm.
But it can also, you can take that too far, and that's called legalism.
Mhm.
I guess for me, I see technological progress is mostly in one direction.
Mhm.
Now modern appliances are terrible, so that, but for the most part, technology is kind of going in one direction. I don't see that with moral progress. I don't see moral progress going in one direction. I think it's a lot of ups and downs and everything's in between. And there's a lot of things that disturb me that are in the popular culture. And some people will call me prudish about that, but I have certain things, certain norms that I think are good. And when I feel like, when I feel like we're going down the wrong path, I don't necessarily want to go down the wrong path at a quicker pace. So that's just.
Yeah. So look at this, if you can read it. The priest, I really liked what Dempsey was saying here. The priests looked with disdain on the prophets of their own times because they thought they were too emotional. You think about how it is today too. So they thought that the prophets were too attached to pleasing their king. So it was an emotional, they thought they were thinking of themselves and pleasing their leaders. So they were guarded against any of these shallow prophets. And I think that's where Dempsey is saying that's necessary. We need to be careful about the shallow prophets, who are just out for change itself, not for any
Exactly.
longer purpose.
Well.
But wait, hey, let me
Sorry.
finish though. But this led them to distrust the prophets who did have the insights that their religion needed. And so that's what slowed the pace for religion. And this is Old Testament times. And I think we can say that it's the same today. So you've got on the one hand, once again, we've got that same tension, got the danger of romancing of this prophet saying, these are all this beautiful life that we can have, versus the danger of being, overly realistic, plodding along of the priest to enforce the traditions. And so it is that tension that we have to live with in every religion of every time. I think that's what Dempsey's trying to teach us.
I think your shallow prophets a lot of times come out of a fanaticism because they pick up, and they try to go down, okay, we're going to do this. And this is,
Yeah.
what I believe is what everybody else should believe. I think that's why you end up with the Jim Joneses and the other.
Well,
bunches.
and to Ryan's point, how do you know
Right.
You know, when we're living in it right here, you know, I mean, when, you know, and I won't get political about it, but I do understand the criticism of a woke culture, that word, I hate that word, but to me, what the pushback is that you're saying, okay, let's all relax, you know, let's all plot along together about what morality is, instead of just always knowing. I mean, I hate those Karens in the world that you see on the memes all the time, you know, because I don't know why it's always women, you know, bothers
Well,
me.
there's Kevin's.
Kevin, okay. But
Let the record show they spell their name the wrong way.
there you go. But it's what the concept is, it's that it's pushing their agenda on people before those people are ready to go there, you know, and I do think it's fair to criticize pushing too fast and too hard.
I think we also always need to keep in check. Are the people doing that, both the priests and the prophets, doing it for the betterment of all, or are they doing it for themselves?
Right.
And I think, you know, where they're coming from determines that. Some of the priests might be freaking out because they don't like the prophets because it's pushing them out of their own comfort zone.
And
Where they're happy and they have, you know, their own, you know, to get their own glory or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think if we don't, and this is kind of my bottom line. If I am not acknowledging the worth of all people, then something's hinky in that particular prophecy or whatever, or
And
position.
sorry, I don't have much time left. And I always have to come back to how Jesus did it. Because Jesus, on the one hand, knew the traditions, he cherished the traditions.
Right.
And then on the other hand, he pushed back at the rampant priestliness of his own.
Jesus wouldn't pull the post out because he has that connection to that.
He could explain it. He could
Right.
probably explain the
Why
traditions
it was there.
better than anybody else. And then he understood the concept of why we're changing. So I'm not going to get to the last couple of questions, but that is what we're talking about. And there's always going to be that tension.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's our modern legacy. I thought this was interesting.
some of these chairs.
Some do better than others.
Yeah. It makes me think that, you know, we do need that priestly function. We need it. But then
Well, you
when do
always
we
need
go
a
too far
counterweight.
with
I
it?
mean-
When do we go too far with it?
Look at all the different control that have some kind of a counterbalance. Concept.
All right. Thanks, everybody.